This is the label project demo, and the first thing I'd like for students to do is go to week 12, and I'd like for you to open your label project demo and download the label demo zip file here at the top, and we're going to download it and follow along with this video at the bottom. I've already downloaded it to the desktop, so I'd like to minimize my window, and we'll double click on our zip file to open it. And I'd like for us to inspect what's in this file. You can see that we have the example label INDD file. We have our illustration here. And we have an example label, which is over here. We can kind of inspect what that looks like. And this is what we'll be making today. And so what I'd like for us to do first is to work on our Photoshop illustration. So let's open up Photoshop, and I'd like for you to hit Command Option Control Shift if you're on a Mac and open it up and reset your settings. And if you're on a PC, hit Control Alt Shift, and we're going to delete our settings. We're going to hit Yes. What I'd like for us to do is just kind of inspect the first illustration. And just notice that we have a green layer on top of a purple layer, and we're using pen light to kind of change the color, and that's basically what we'll be doing. It shouldn't take us that long, and so we're not going to save this. I'd like for us to drag and drop our Bunch Ripe Red Grapes file into Photoshop, and then we have it right here. And before we get moving further, I'd like for us to unlock this background layer, and we're going to label it color, and we're going to duplicate it, and you can just drag it into this plus here. If you want to duplicate it a different way, you can go to your drop down menu off to the side and go new layer, but we should have a color copy here. And the next step I'd like for us to do is I want us to discard all the color and make this a grayscale so that we can make it a duotone. We're going to go to Mode and go to Grayscale, discard the color information, and we're not going to merge. Don't merge. And the next step is we're going to make it a duotone. To make a duotone, you have to discard the color information. It has to be anti-aliased. And we're going to go and choose a green color. And I'm going to kind of make it a little bit more minty of a green color, somewhere in this color area right here. Okay, and I'm going to title it green. Okay. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to go to our top layer here, and we're going to darken these highlights in this top layer here. We're going to go to our levels. You can go to Image Adjustment Levels here. And what I'd like for us to do is to take our black dropper tool and just kind of get some of this to be a lot darker. Something like this, maybe a little darker. You can pull that in. That's looking pretty good to me. Okay. And then once we're there, notice that the background layer has a little bit more detail. And what I'd like for us to do is to drag the more filled version into the background. And I'm going to retitle that one Purple. And before we get moving further, to make this duotone a color space, we have to change it back to Mode and go to a CMYK or an RGB color space. And again, I'm not going to merge them. Okay. And then what we're going to do is under our purple color right here, I'm going to take my eyeball off of my color, and I'm going to make this a different color, and you can use Command U or go to Image Adjustments and go to Hue and Saturation. And what we're going to do here is we're going to change it to a kind of purpley, bright purpley color. Somewhere in here. And I go OK. And the next step that we're going to do is we're going to select all of these grapes. Now it's going to be a little challenging. We can go to our selection tools off to the left side. And I want us to grab our grapes. And you can hold your shift key down if you're having a hard time grabbing specific little areas here. And I'm noticing there's areas down here that I don't want. And you can use your Option key to kind of hone it in a little bit. Doing the best I can here. And notice it's grabbing a little bit of that leaf there. Again, you can kind of hit your Option key to get it a little closer in. Hit your Shift key to kind of grab some of these parts. Now, this is looking pretty good to me. There's this little area right here that I might want to take off. So I can hit my Option key and kind of pull in this little area. That's looking pretty good to me. What we can do now is I'd like for us to hit our inverse in selection. And you can hit Command-Shift-I if that's easier. And we're going to hit delete on our keyboard. And notice what happens when we throw this color on top. And I'd like for us to go to this green layer here, and I'd like for us to change it to a pin light. And this should get us closer to the color of our illustration. Now I'm noticing a couple things that are a little different than my final version. First off, the image is a lot lighter, and I also have this green reflection at the bottom. And one of the things that I'd like to do is to use our brush tool on our green layer, and we're going to make the brush bigger by hitting our right bracket tool. And once I have a big brush, I can go to my swatches and I can change it to white and just kind of delete all of that information that I see below there. And this is fine for my illustration. And what we can do here is go back to our layers, and I want to mess with the color of my green layer. And I'm going to deselect now. You can hit Command D or go to your select tool and deselect. What I'd like for us to do while we have everything on this green layer, I'd like for us to use our levels and to darken it a bit. And we can kind of get more of closer to that original color. And I'd also like for us to use our hue and saturation. You can use Command U, or you can go to Image and go to Adjustments and to hit hue and saturation. And again, we can mess with our saturation. I'm going to desaturate just ever so slightly. And I'm going to kind of pull in those blues that we had in that original file. Then I hit OK. And that's close to our original. And after we're done getting it close to our original, I'd like for us to save it as Grapes Final. So what I'd like for us to do now is I'd like for us to save it. I want us to go File, Save As. And we're going to save to our computer. And I'm going to title this Grapes Final. And we are going to leave it as a PSD. And I'd like to save it to our label demo. And we're going to hit Save. We're going to hit OK. Once we're done, we can minimize this. And I'm going to go to InDesign, and we're going to recreate this document right here. So what I'd like for us to do first is go to File, New, or Command N, and we are going to go to Inches. After we've changed to inches, what I'd like for us to do is enter 3 as our width and 4.25 as our height, and that is the specifications of this project. I'm going to make a few pages. I'm going to make maybe a couple. And I'm not going to make them facing pages like a spread. I'm going to make them separate individual pages, so I'm not going to make them facing pages. I'm going to start on page 1. I'm going to have 2 columns. You can get rid of the gutter or you can keep the gutter. I'm going to keep it just for the purposes of this demo. And we want to set our margins at 0.125. And we are going to set our bleed at 0.25, like we have in the past. And I'm going to hit Create. So this is our document here. And before we move any further, I'd like for us to add some grids or guides to this project. And instead of Essentials up at the top, I'd like for us to go to Typography. And once we're here, we can go to our master A. Let's add some guides to this. Let's go to Layout, Create Guides, and we are going to hit 3 rows, and let's preview it. And I'd like for us to have no gutter on those rows. So this is what it should look like. And it says that it's hit to the page. Make sure that it's hit to the margins. So that should look better. All right. So once we're there, what I'd like for us to do is go to our page 1, and we're going to start laying it out. I'm going to lay a kind of paper texture on the background just for the purposes of this demo. Now, this is something that you would choose if you were working with a printer. You would choose a particular paper style. But let's say we are, trying to show a demonstration or show something in a digital realm, then you would want to choose background color or background paper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Command D, or we can go to File, Place, and I'd like for us to grab this ivory off-white paper texture from our label demo. Let's hit Open. And what we're going to do is we're going to click it from the exterior of that bleed, and I'm going to drag it out. And you can see I'm trying to make it widthways, and I'm going to flip it, and I'm going to place it into that document. And I'm going to make it a little bigger by hitting my Control and Shift, or my Command and Shift. And we are going to fit it to that bleed. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to start building this much like we built the original. And we're going to start placing our text and images. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to place our document from our desktop, and we're going to go to Command D, or Place, and let me go to my desktop and grab my label demo, and I'm going to grab my Grapes Final here. I'm going to go Open, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to click within my margin, and I'm going to click and drag out so that the image fits that area. Now the image kind of doesn't fit that area quite perfectly. Make sure that image kind of fits to that edge. So I want this image to kind of go to that edge of the margin. And I'm going to click my Command and my Shift key. And if you're on a PC, just hit your Control and your Shift. And we're going to drag out. And I'm going to move my box in a little bit so that it fits within that margin. And once it's there, I know it looks kind of awkward because it still has that white box. What I'd like for us to do next on this is I'd like for us to go to Effects, go to Transparency, and then I'd like for us to select Multiply. And we can preview it down here in the corner, and you can see how it's going to look. So that's looking pretty good to me. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to start building our text. Now, I'm going to reference this one. We're going to make it in Bodoni and Gill Sans at the bottom. And we're just going to add a fake title, Gibbonheart. We're going to make a Merlot and a vintage 2010, and we're going to just put our alcohol by volume. We're going to use our image as the central focus of the hierarchy. Then it's going to be Gibbonheart, then 2010, and then the small information. All right, so let's go in here and let's start building. So we're going to drag out a text box at the top. We're going to type in 2010, and we're going to select it, and we're going to go to Bodoni. And you should have something on your computer called Bodoni URW Bold. If not, you can activate it. I'm going to go ahead and select this one, and I'm going to make it bigger. About 24 points seems pretty good. And I'm going to drag it in, the text box in. You can also hit your Command Option C. Now, notice that we still have our smart guides, so you can see exactly where to place it. I'm going to drag it in from the margin a little bit because I have that awkward space between the image and this 2010. Now I'm noticing some optical gaps here in the middle between the 20 and the 10. So you can grab your type tool, you can click it in there, and we're going to take our kerning and we're going to make it less than maybe 50. That looks pretty good to me. All right. And again, make sure that it's centered. So use your smart guides. All right. So that's looking pretty good. Let's add our gibbon heart. And we're going to grab our type tool again. We're going to drag a text box out, and we're going to type with a capital G I. Before we move any further, let's go ahead and change it to our Bodoni. And I want to choose the Bodoni URW. And we are going to choose this medium right here. And I'm going to make it a little bigger, make it about 18 points. And let's bump it up to about 20. And then let's go ahead and make that G a little bigger. Make it 4 points bigger. And that looks close to our original design. Let's go and check it out. And we can hit our Command Option C or Control Alt C if you're on a PC, and we can start continuing to develop. Now I'm noticing a couple things with my guides here. I'm noticing my grapes are a little low on the page. I'm going to kind of shift these up a little bit, and I think 2010 is okay, but I wanted to give our gibbon heart and our Merlot a little bit more room, and just make sure that it's centered. And the next step is to make our Merlot. So we're going to make a new text box. We're going to hit enter, insert a special character. We're going to add a hyphen or dash. We're going to add an M dash. And we're going to say Merlot. And I'm going to space again, and I'm going to add another insert a special character and hyphens and dashes, and I'm going to add an M dash. So that should look pretty good. And we're going to highlight our text, and I'm going to go up to the top here and change it to Bodoni. And we're going to choose the URW because that's in our cloud. And I'm going to choose the bold oblique, except this time I'm going to track it out a little bit. So let's give it a little bit more breathing. And there we go. And I can hit my Command Option C to fit it to the text frame, or Control Alt C. And let's kind of center this. Now, if you're concerned about these things being perfectly centered, we can always hit our Shift key and grab each of these and use our center right there. And that will help us align it. The next step that we're going to do is we're going to add our Gill Sans at the bottom. We're going to add the alcohol by volume. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to grab a text box from my type tool. I'm going to drag it out at the bottom here, and I'm going to type out ALC 12% by volume. And 750 milliliters. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this Gill Sans before I move any further. And we're going to use our Nova. I'd like to use our Light or our Book. And I'm going to make it much smaller. I'm going to make it like 8 points. And I'm going to my 750 milliliters to the edge. Obviously this isn't very accurate. I'm not using a precise grid here, but I'm trying to align it to the edge of my text box or my text frame, and we can center that right here. And that should give us a good idea of our hierarchy. And if I hit my Shift W, this is what our design is looking like. Now I want the ink to look like it's on the paper. So I'm going to do one more step here. I'm going to adjust all of this, and we are going to make it about, I would say about 95% or 95% to 92% opacity. And that way when we look at the text, we can see that it's kind of blending into the background. Again, you can, choose it and make it even more transparent if you'd like. It's up to you. it will change the color of the text. So if you're at 85 right there, I'd recommend keeping all of it at 85. So I would make that at 85. And there we go. So this is my final wine label here. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to go to our file export, and we're going to make a JPEG so that we can add it to our wine bottle. So I'm going to call it wine label final. And I am going to add it to my label demo here. And I'm going to hit save. I'm not going to make it 72 ppi, I'm going to make it 300 ppi because that's what we would use in print. I'm going to make our color space CMYK. And all pages, I'm going to choose a range, and I'm going to only choose the one that I want to use for my final. So I'm going to choose 1 to 1. I'm going to hit export. So now that we're done with this label, I'm going to minimize my InDesign. I'm going to go back to Photoshop. I'm going to X out of my final PSD. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to this label demo folder again, and we're going to try to recreate this right here. And we're going to open this wine bottle mockup PSD. I'm going to throw it in there. You'll see that we're going to throw our label onto our bottle, and we're going to try to arc it and make some layers on it to give it some shadows and to put that label on this bottle. So the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to go back to that label demo. We're going to grab our blank bottle. We're going to throw it down into Photoshop, and if that is too difficult for you, you can always go to right here and go File, Open, and we can go to Label Demo, and we can open our bottle there. But since we have it open here, the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to File, Place, an embedded file, which means that it will be in the file. And we're going to go to our label demo, and we are going to grab our final label. I'm going to hit place. And I notice it's a little small. And I'd like for us to use our guides. So I'm going to hit my Command R or Control R to grab our rulers. And I'm going to make kind of a small guide here. Now you can change this to inches if you want to, but I'm going to make it, let's say, that big. And I'm not going to want it to snap, so I'm going to go to my view and I'm going to turn off my snap. And I'm going to drag out that corner, and I'm going to make it as far to the edge as I possibly can. Now I'm noticing that the guides aren't as big as I want them to be, so I might move my guides down a little bit. And I'm thinking that this should be a little higher up on the bottle. But there is a reason why we are using these ruler guides. And that looks great. That looks great. Once we're here, we can zoom in. And what I'd like for us to do before we move any further is I'd like for us to hit our return key, just so that we can see that the image is a little clearer. And the next thing I'd like for us to do is to select that image, and we are going to hit Command T or Control T, or you can go to Edit Transform, and we are going to distort. And what we can do once we go to distort is we can go to this little grid tool up at the top, and we can start making a little arc on the top to make it look a little more like the bottle shape. Is everybody kind of seeing that? Now we want to make it subtle. We don't want it to look like it was accidentally done. And we're going to do it on the bottom. And the reason I put those guides there is so we can see how much of an arc we're making, because sometimes we don't know. That looks pretty good to me. Might even take that in a little bit. That looks good. And I hit return or enter. And once it's done, what we're going to do next is we're going to start building our shadows on top. Now we can turn our guides off by hitting Command or Control semicolon. I'm going to just turn them off so we can see what we're working on. And what we're going to do next is we're going to add a new layer down here on the right side. And we're going to grab our paintbrush tool and we're going to choose our default here, which is our black. And before I start adding any marks, I'd like for it to be a soft edge brush. So we'll just be a soft edge brush. We can make it a little bigger, but I think this is the right size. And I'm just going to kind of make, and you can hold your shift key to make straight lines. And I'm going to click in a new space. And once we're here, what I'd like for us to do, because we're kind of seeing the marks we're making, we're going to go to Filter up at the top, and we're going to go to Blur, and we're going to go to Gaussian Blur. And this will give us a good amount of control of the radius of the blur. And I want it to kind of spread out a bunch. I'm going to get it to be almost as wide as that. And we go OK. So once we're there, we're going to want to clean up the bottle, the edge of the bottle. And we are going to want to potentially clean up things that we see in this layer. So we can go to opacity and we can control kind of the darkness of that shadow that we put on, and I'm going to make it much lighter so it doesn't look quite as harsh. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to erase some of that fuzz off of the side. And what you can do here is you can take your marquee tool or your rectangular marquee tool and grab out a rectangle here, and I'm going to grab one that goes out pretty far, and I'm just going to hit delete, and then I'm going to do it to the other side. I'm going to hit delete. And this should be what our shadow looks like. All right, and that is our demo. We're going to save this to our computer, and I'm going to save it as a JPEG for the final. I'm going to call it Wine Bottle Mockup Final. And we'll go to my label demo, and I go OK. And I don't need to save this. And I can X out of that, don't save that one. And we can go to our folder now and preview our final work. So we can look at our JPEG here. We can look at our wine bottle here. And this is our final work. For the final, I'm going to have you guys turning in your PDF, not a JPEG of the label, but I am going to have you submit a JPEG of your label put onto a wine bottle. All right, good luck everybody.